I can get started. Again, I'm Danielle. I'm the life safety educator with Boulder Fire Rescue. So what we're going to do today, we're going to keep this session pretty informal, but I am going to ask that everybody mutes just so that there's no sound interference. We're going to be taking questions. This session pretty much depends, the length of it depends on how many questions there are. We're asking to keep the topics mostly to what we were speaking about in the main room. Definitely your questions about home hardening for sure. And then any kind of things like that. If you have any questions about preparedness, we're happy to answer those. What I'm going to ask is that if you do have a question, if you put it in the chat room, and I'm going to help Jamie Carpenter and Chief Oliver answer those questions. So I'll be looking at that chat box the whole time and asking those questions so that they can give you guys some answers. If you do want to ask your question in person, it's a really long one or it's super specific or something like that, just go ahead and write your name and say that, I'd like to ask the question, and then I'll notify you and have you unmute yourself so that you can ask it. Otherwise, the chat box might be the easiest way so that if there are similar questions, I can group them together for our panelists. Okay, and then Jamie and Brian are going to start off by talking about some of the resources here for you all as city residents. And I guess you guys ready to go?
I am, yeah. We'd like to start by giving an explanation of what the detailed wildfire home assessment program looks like and what that experience is like. And I see some familiar names here, Jerry, Lisa, Deborah, that have already had wildfire home assessments conducted. So maybe you can share some of your experience later on in the discussion. But to request that detailed wildfire home assessment, there's a link from the City Fire Department website that we'll place in the chat. And that email will come to Chief Oliver and Danielle and myself, and we'll reach out to you and schedule that detailed home assessment. And we'll come out. It usually takes an hour or so. And we'll ask you some questions about emergency preparedness, like some of the topics that Danielle talked about earlier in the main group. And then we'll take a walk around your house and listen to the story of your property and how long you've lived in the area and what your experience has been with wildfire. And after we've taken a walk around and taken a look, we'll walk around with an app on our phone or our tablet that helps us collect information and put it into a report that will identify things that look really good and also things that are recommendations that we are making to help improve your home. They're not mandatory. There's no codes or ordinances related to this process. It's completely voluntary in terms of the projects that you choose to take on or not is completely up to you. We just want to give you the information of, hey, these are the threats to your home, and these are our recommendations about how to fix them. And either later that day or usually within 48 hours of your assessment, you'll receive an email with a report that has both the recommendations and annotated photos of not just what the recommendation is, but specifically what area of your property. And from there, there is an open dialogue between yourself and the person that completed your assessment from Boulder Fire Rescue. So if you have questions that follow up to that, or you're running into a challenge in terms of finding someone to provide service or something like that, we'll do everything that we can to help support you. The service certainly doesn't end after the report is sent out. So that's what that process looks like. And we highly encourage anyone that hasn't taken advantage of that service that there's no charge for to take advantage of. And for the people that are in the room with us today that have already had the detailed home assessment, we'd love to hear what your experience has been after the assessment and what projects you've chosen to take on and what influenced you to take those projects on in what order. Another product that's available isn't quite as personalized, but it's the curbside wildfire home assessment. We want to talk a little bit about what that is and how it came to be. So That is a map that's also accessible from the city fire department website. And that is really serves two purposes. First of all, as an awareness tool for homeowners, residents, and neighborhoods to look at what, basically from the view from the curbside. We don't go on anyone's private property to conduct that. So it's really what we can see from the road, which inherently limits, the threats that we can see. And we have a scoring system built into an app that generates a color-coded rating for each home. So both to create awareness amongst homeowners and neighbors, but also as an awareness tool for responders. So that's a layer in our structure protection plan, so that we can download that or upload that to our cooperators that are going to be helping us defend those neighborhoods, and they can see which houses are in good shape, again, from that zoomed out view from the curb, and which might need some help, so they can make decisions about what to prioritize from there. And we haven't completed that, and we're also focusing on the most outer layer of the onion, so to speak. So those properties that have direct exposure to open space or public lands, or that are in the first wave. So that we hope to complete that in the next couple of years, and then continue to conduct that assessment into the deeper layers of the onion, and further into, well, it may not be as directly threatened by the flaming front, but certainly is still in the ember zone.
Great. That there's a question about where do we specify the wildland urban interface really being, like who's at the most risk in our community? Is there a certain number of blocks in from open space, or how do we identify who's at risk within the city?
So I'll take that one, Jimmy.
Thanks.
What we look at is, I mean, in general, the entire western edge of the city is anywhere where homes meet wildland fuels is considered the urban interface. Truly within a mile of that area where that wildland fuel would be technically considered wildland urban interface, because that's within that ember zone. So embers from a traveling wildfire or wind-driven wildfire can travel up to that mile into the urban center, if you will. I mean, so that is a technical definition of an urban interface, but what we're really focusing on and what we push for as far as planning enforcement of the urban interface code is generally, it's about that first block from the wildland urban interface, so that open space layer into the city. So basically into that first main road, and then moving into that second block. That's what we would consider our primary zone. And that's the first area that gets evacuated if we were to do that in a response capacity. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Chief Oliver. There was another question of how do I get set up for an individual assessment? Jamie put a link in the chat box for exactly where you go to sign up for the wildfire mitigation assistance request. So please, you can take a look on our website and find that as well. We have another question on suggestions on how to get one's HOA on board. I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. So I think that, when you're working with your neighborhood, which is really what an HOA is that in any neighborhood, there are people who have goodwill, who want the same thing that you want. And we call them spark plugs in the fire department. And we were able to find that in Jerry, for example. And so I think that a community is able to build capacity from within. So it starts with finding people that you can work with. And what I've seen that's been really successful is having education opportunities, of course, as the fire department, especially me as an education outreach person, I'm happy to educate any group of neighbors about the wildfire risk and steps that can be taken to prepare for that, to reduce your risk. So education is always a great tool. We do have that curbside assessment map available online as well, which is a great conversation starter for neighbors to look at. We also love when neighbors come together and they request those detailed home assessments together so that we make one trip and we meet with multiple neighbors. And I think that that really gets the ball rolling. When it comes to, I think a lot of these actions need to be started internally. And so a really great way to do that is just start by doing the work on your house. Do it on a Saturday afternoon when everyone can see you. And those are such great conversation starters. We kind of talk about, when smoke is in the air, that's a great time for us to teach about wildfire risk, to let people know about evacuations, about wildfire safety. But there's also a saying that the smell of a wood chipper in the neighborhood is a great motivator to actually start doing mitigation work. So I think you need to start by leading by example, starting with your home and moving out from there, and working with your neighbors or your HOA board and finding what they value. Like why is wildfire a risk to what they value? Maybe it's the viewscape of the Flatirons. Maybe it's their child has asthma from wildfire smoke. I think it all starts with these conversations that you can have with your neighbors about what's at risk to them personally from a wildfire. And to be perfectly honest, everybody in the city of Boulder has a risk to wildfire. And so you just need to find that common connection with your neighbors. And then it's a big struggle. I'm going to be honest. It's not easy. And if there are any folks in this group, I would invite you, to unmute and please share your experience if you found that there are things that have helped you work with your HOA, work with your neighbors, to have successful mitigation and home hardening happen in your community. Okay, let's see. So is it possible to put the current risk zone map on the city website?
So I need to ask a clarifying question on that. Because thank you for bringing that up, Danielle. Are you asking, so our curbside assessment that the color-coded map Jamie was speaking about is already there. I think Jamie posted a link to it. If not, we can. Or are you talking about what I was talking about with what we consider the wildland urban interface, whoever, Lisa?
It's the interface map. I mean, I looked at the map on the city website and it was like from the 1960s. So I figured things had changed a little bit.
Possibly, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it depends on which map you looked at. But
under city maps, the map webpage, there's a fire map.
Okay, so that probably is a really old map. Our current curbside map, which again is only about the southern half of the city, we've not completed that project yet, is up. I'll see if, I look at Jamie's looking diligently like he's going to post a link there. He'll put that link up so you can at least take a look at that. We are currently in the meat of revamping what we consider our wild and urban interface as a project for the chief fire marshal, like I said, as it goes to code enforcement. So once we get that done, I believe we'll also push that to our website, on the fire department website, so people can at least see if they are not considered what we are calling the primary urban interface as far as code enforcement goes.
Great. We had another question about the information that we shared today in the video. Will it be available so that people can share in their neighborhoods? Yes, we are going to be putting the video of our spark plug Jerry onto our city website here shortly in the next week or so. And then our hope is that we can continue to do these short videos, because I think that it's awesome when we're able to have the perspective come from the neighbor and the person who's actually doing the work. With that, a good question I hear often is, what are the easiest and cheapest tasks to start with when you're home hardening, or if you're trying to reduce fuels in your yard? Okay, so I'm not sure if Jamie, if you want to jump in at any point, but there's lots of free things you can do to start. We always encourage people, like cleaning their gutters is always, something that's really important to do so that embers don't land there and catch your home on fire. Moving your wood pile away from the side of your house is something that doesn't cost money. Can you give some other examples, Jamie, of some things that might be free or
Yeah.
easy?
Mhm. Absolutely. I was scrambling in the background to find the curbside map link, and it's up. It looks old, but you have to scroll, you have to zoom in to get the colors to populate. Otherwise it does look like a map from the 70s. Yeah, so we really encourage people to focus their energy starting at the home and then work out in concentric circles from there. So, the low hanging fruit, so to speak, are really focusing on areas where, for instance, an end cut, wall in the exterior of your house where leaves and Safeway bags collect. That's a good place to start, because those are also wind eddies where embers are also likely to land. So areas like those where the leaves collect, cleaning those leaves, replacing that landscape with if it's combustible landscaping, replacing with rockscape. And it can be one bag from the hardware store at a time of rockscape in terms of replacing those extra vulnerable areas. Another extra vulnerable area, you mentioned already, gutters, and these are all ongoing maintenance things. Another one is underneath your deck. If you have a deck, that area underneath it is that, especially if the deck material is dimensional lumber, that's a very vulnerable area where embers could land and ignite your deck. And that might be, we're really, the end state with home preparation in general is that it's so well prepared that we don't need to patrol your neighborhood when there is a fire going on and there are embers landing in your property. We can take a walk around your yard or look at the curbside map and say, wow, this house there's no way I could burn down, so we don't need to be here. And that takes an enormous amount of effort to get to that point, but we want to help everybody get to that level of resilience. And again, there's never a guarantee that that your house will be so well prepared that it's fireproof, but that's what we strive for. And starting at the house and working out from there. And again, I think another misconception is that, with the home assessment, that we're going to come in and ask you to cut all your trees down. Not true. We can't make you cut any of them down, first of all. And second of all, there are ways to keep high value trees. And Jerry gave us an awesome example of how to do that. You don't have to, a lot of smaller trees, if you remove the 8 to 10 feet of the lower limbs, they're going to look weird like a lollipop. And you can, like I said in the video, you can scale that to, hey, even if I just remove the first few rungs of limbs and create some separation between those bottom set of limbs and the surface fuels, and maybe it's removing more of the surface fuels, the grasses and pine needles and the accumulation of things. Irrigation and hardscape at the base of high value trees is another way that you can help improve the resiliency of those trees. And that radiant heat of a tree like the spruce that Jerry shares with his neighbors, an incredible amount of radiant heat from that burning all at once, or torching as we call it in wildland terminology, is also going to create a ton of embers that are going to end up downwind in your neighbor's property. So even just taking on one tree like that at a time is going to be helpful.
Great. We have another question specific to an area, but I think it's a good sort of general question. So I live on North Boulder Park, and I wonder if any prep work will be done there and in other city parks. So Can you talk a little bit about some of the mitigation work that is happening on the part of the city, whether it's in the parks or open space?
For sure. Generally, Parks and Rec, due to like the majority of their parks are fairly irrigated, usually well managed. We don't typically do a lot of specific fire mitigation in the actual city parks. We sure can. We can sure make recommendations to Parks and Rec for that, or come take a look and give them an assessment on the park. We've done that in a couple of places, but the majority of that mitigation work is done through open space, along the open space system. And we're gearing up. It is that time of year. We're gearing up with the fire ecosystem management plan implementation crew, and we'll be doing a lot of work around that kind of Chautauqua area this summer so far. But as far as North Boulder Park specifically, I don't believe there's any plans there. But if you believe there is a fire risk or a fire hazard, you can put something out on that, send an email to the Wildfire Help email, and I'll do some research and get in touch with my counterparts at Park and Rec and see what we can do.
She said that actually North Boulder Park is like a swamp, so she thinks that should provide some protection.
Yeah, that one
great.
is. For sure.
So there was another question about if we can't replace our wood deck, is there some kind of fire retardant finish?
Oh, Jamie's looking at me. There is. They're kind of expensive as far as paint goes, but you really can. Quite honestly, the best way to look is just Google it. There are a bunch of companies that make that stuff. Some of them are a little more effective than others, but they sell it right there at Home Depot. Some of it works really well. Nothing is perfect, obviously, but it will definitely help from that ember wash or that ember zone. Embers landing on a fence and igniting it won't have enough. Those embers won't have enough heat to burn through that fire retardant material. So that stuff is out there, and it is pretty good.
Great. That kind of leads into the next question too, Brian. Does a wood fence need to be replaced, or just the section connecting to the house? And they also asked what materials should they use?
Honestly, you going, Jamie?
Want me to take that one?
Go for it.
Okay, so the best case scenario is that the wood fence gets completely replaced, but if that's not reality and that's going to be too big of an undertaking, then it's adequate to replace the part that connects to the house. So in many cases, when we do detailed home assessments, if it's not realistic to replace that, even the part that connects to the house, what you can do is replace the base of that fence where it meets the house, especially with non-combustible landscaping, maybe some irrigation, even a drip line. And then either, just replacing the gate or even leaving the gate open, put that on your evacuation, if time allows, checklist, maybe at the end of the checklist, along with some things that we will do in a fire suppression actions, like moving combustible deck furniture off the deck onto the lawn, propane tanks from propane grills that are on your deck, things like that. Again, if time allows. If there's no time, do not concern yourself with that. But leaving the gate open, if it's a wood fence that connects to the house, just leaving the gate open should provide enough of a break. But again, best case scenario, replace the fence. Better, replace the part that connects to the house. And you can, another mitigation option for helping provide a barrier of the radiant heat between the fence and your house is to put some metal sheeting or flashing between the deck and the house. And that, again, that's in kind of the good or better category, not best, but definitely if there aren't any other options, or it's cost prohibitive or time prohibitive, it's certainly better to either open the gate, replace it, the part that connects to the house with non-combustible materials, or put some flashing in there.
Great. We have another question about what the highest risk plants found around homes are. Do you have any strong opinions about any particular kinds of plants, Jamie?
Yes. Junipers are far and away the highest threat, and we know that they're prevalent in landscaping because they're relatively cheap and they grow like crazy, but they also happen to be the most hazardous. And there's a couple of reasons why. First of all, their surface area to volume makeup, basically how feathery the leaves are. When they dry out, they're extremely prone to burn very actively. They also have in their chemical composition, they're resinous and have traits of their chemical composition that encourage very active burning and also active creation of additional embers that create more spot fires. There are certainly others, spruce and Douglas fir trees, that have a tendency for their limbs to grow to the ground, like in the example of the Bruce spruce that Jerry shares with his neighbors. Those are also, because their limbs grow especially close to the ground and are not self-pruning like a ponderosa pine, they also promote active fire spread and more spot fires. So those are the big culprits. And feel free to add any others, Oliver, that I didn't mention.
How do you remove a juniper?
Well, the best case scenario, again, is that you remove not just the tree, but also the stump. And I know that Jerry has some experience with removing large amounts of juniper. And I would encourage folks to do some research about, what the long-term plan for replacing junipers is, because one of the things that Jerry and his colleagues in Shanahan Ridge discovered is that planting other plants in a space where you've removed a juniper can be problematic. So I don't have that research at the tip of my fingers right now, but that's certainly something we can help advise you on as you go through the process of that. But I would say that there's not a bad way to remove a juniper.
Just remove it, right?
Just cut it off, low stump it close to the ground and make it go away. But do consider, what that replacement looks like, what plants you're going to replace there, and what the timeline looks like, and things like that.
Okay, there's another question, and Judith, if I'm not asking it right, please feel free to let me know. But she's asking, is Jerry's preparation to keep his house from burning less or from burning at all? Like, why does Jerry do this home hardening and fuels reduction in his property?
Yeah, like if his neighborhood caught fire, would the fire go around his house more than other people's, or what is the goal if everybody's not doing this?
Yeah, I'll do my best to address that, and then Jerry, feel free to unmute if it's not the best. So really the goal with all of these actions is to make your house less susceptible to an ember from the big fire landing somewhere on your house or around it, and then having fire spread from where that ember landed and then doing damage to your house. So, and that I think there's maybe a little bit of a misconception that the flaming front, the big flames that we see on the TV news footage, is going to burn our house down. And we find in the majority of cases, to the tune of 80 to 90% are destroyed by embers after the flaming front has come through. So that's really what a lot of these actions are designed to do, is to remove susceptible places for embers to land. So for instance, it really, if an ember landed at the base of the blue spruce that Jerry removed the lower limbs, does that ember have the ability to spread from there either to Jerry's house or into the middle and upper limbs of that tree, and either create more spot fires or create enough radiant heat that it's going to catch Jerry's house on fire? Jerry, would care to add anything about that, or?
Sure. I mean, most of what we've done was after speaking with you folks at Wildland Fire Division, and it was really focused on both reducing the risk to our individual home. We back up to open space. In our case, it's private open space. So there's the risk from grass fires coming through that way, whether it's through spotting from embers or whatever. But also because this particular PUD, the homes are very tightly packed. We're typically 10 feet apart between homes. The issue, if one home goes up, not only does that generate more embers, but the radiant heat from that home can cause the neighboring home to catch fire just from the heat given off. So that's part of the reason we've tried to approach it as a neighborhood-wide effort. Our HOA has been very active in trying to mitigate on our common spaces. But of course, on the individual properties, it's up to each individual homeowner. So it's really been more a process of trying to assist with education of homeowners. Events like this, individual work with BFRD. We've had homeowner meetings with Jamie and Brian and other members of the fire department to answer questions from our individual homeowners in the neighborhood who have specific concerns and questions. So it's sort of an all of the above approach. And as I think Jamie or somebody said at the very outset of this, there are no guarantees. A wildfire is just that, it's wild. But anything and everything that we do to reduce the risk, hopefully it means if we reduce 10% of the risk, then it's 10% less chance that our house goes up if there's a fire in the area. And on down, I think of the neighborhood work kind of like herd immunity for COVID. The more we can do as a group, the less likely it is that any one of us individually is going to be engulfed in a fire.
Thanks, Jerry. That's a great answer to that. We have another question about Shanahan Ridge area. The Shanahan Ridge area has limited escape routes and is a densely populated area. In the event of an active wildfire, suggestions on how to escape if there is traffic gridlock. It's kind of what I was talking about with the emergency preparedness is that you do not have to wait for an emergency notification to come through to tell you to leave your home. If you start to get that feeling inside of you that like this isn't right, go ahead and start taking those measures right away. There is no reason that you have to depend on a government agency to let you know how to take care of yourself, your family, your neighbors. So my advice would be like not to be waiting to that point to have everyone evacuate. But that being said, that's not always the case. You don't always get enough time or heads up for that. And so when we talked about emergency preparedness and evacuation plans, we're practicing them. We're actually practicing them, not just writing it down, not just having a conversation, but practicing it and making sure that just like in a house fire, you have two ways out of your home, that if you're leaving your city, your neighborhood, that you have two ways out of your neighborhood and out of Boulder. And there is no guarantee that there wouldn't be any traffic gridlock, but I'm not sure, Chief Oliver, if you want to talk about how the city does these mass evacuations, if there's any specific information that we can give them about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you've noticed, and it's probably high time we go out and take a look at them again, but we have some signage up specifically around that Shanahan Ridge area that, they're kind of like if you've been to the East Coast or from the East Coast, they have the hurricane evacuation signs. We have wildfire evacuation route signs. They're blue. They're all along kind of that Greenbrier, Lehigh, all in that general area, kind of hopefully to herd folks in the right direction, because I do realize that a lot of those streets around Shanahan are pretty tight and narrow, a lot of cars parked on them, high density. So that's one step, is we try to keep it somewhat organized with folks. And if you drive it every day, you see those signs, and hopefully you know that there is a couple, 2-3 ways out of those particular neighborhoods. And like Danielle said, is to drive them and know them and practice them. The other thing is within our structure protection planning process, and with all of the from the response side, the things that we've done is we've built into our Everbridge system, or I guess what you guys would probably be familiar with is a reverse 911 system, is we have broken all of those areas down into GIS polygons. And so as we go in as responders and say, okay, this area may be threatened or that, we do it in a very organized fashion, and each individual polygon gets evacuated at a time, as opposed to let's call everybody and have everybody evacuate at the same time, because we understand that that's going to cause problems. And we work very closely with our law enforcement folks to go close intersections, open other intersections, and maintain that a traffic flow is going one direction as opposed to two-way, so we can help facilitate all of that and not cause that traffic panic. But again, as we've said 100 times, there's not 100% guarantee, but we do definitely have plans in place to help prevent that from happening.
Great. I'm looking at the chat box, and I think that we've answered everyone's questions. If you have any others that you would like to share with the group, feel free to type it or unmute yourself, and we're happy to answer.
We heard some suggestions from Jamie about how to go online and learn about removing junipers, but I understand that Jerry has experience removing junipers. I'm wondering if he can share some of his experiences about what has worked well for removing junipers up there.
Well, I'll take a crack at it. The first and best option I know of is a chainsaw. And that's how we removed our upright juniper, for instance. But the lower growing, the Pfitzer style, present a bigger challenge, quite frankly, because they typically are multi-stemmed and so on. So you just have to get in there and start to take out individual chunks or branches or whatever as you go. As a neighborhood, we've looked into this for some of our common areas, and at least one of the tree services in the area uses a big grappler, and they just grab the whole bush and yank it out. They'll have people standing by around the edge to cut roots and so forth, so it doesn't damage adjacent sidewalks. But that's another approach. One of the issues that we've encountered and tried to deal with is we've learned that, at least for certain kinds of junipers, perhaps all, there are allelopathic chemicals that junipers put out through their roots, I guess, into the ground to reduce competition from other plants. And we've reached out to CSU Extension and so on to try and learn more about this. And if you go online, you'll find a fair amount about it, but a lot of it's sort of contradictory. And on the East Coast, maybe it's a different kind of an issue than it is here in the West. So, as I said, we reached out to CSU Extension, and they have said, yes, indeed, there are allelopathic chemicals that junipers put into the ground, as well as other plants do. And their best recommendation for mitigation before planting with something else is to mix in quite a bit of compost. Depending on the pH level of the soil and what you plan to plant in its stead, you may need to adjust pH as well. But, pardon? But digging in compost and then waiting a year or perhaps even two before the ground is suitable for certain other plants. And we've got a group of junipers that we removed as an HOA 2 years ago now. And last year we dug in compost, and finally this year we're able to see, in this case, it's native grasses starting to move back in.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
I went ahead and included another link that we have. If you haven't seen it before, it's the Boulder Fire Rescue Wildfire Preparedness Guide. And it's a really helpful tool, I think, for neighbors to start these conversations. If they're not able to have the specific answers, it might just be a lack of knowledge. It's a great tool. And if you ever need some copies that you want to be able to use with your neighbor, please feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to provide a physical copy, but there is also a PDF available on our website that I've linked there in the chat. We also have another question about preparedness and the measures to take in a condo community. Are there any sort of differences between like an individual homeowner versus the condo communities in Boulder?
I can take that one, Danielle. And what I would encourage Max to do is to reach out and just request a detailed home assessment for your specific property. And that's a good starting place. So we can do, assessment of just your unit or your building, and hope to include, the property management folks or the HOA, whichever is applicable. And we have done detailed home assessments on large apartment or condo style buildings before. And all the same principles apply. We're going to look for the, susceptible, vulnerable places of the building, identify those and make recommendations to make them better. And if you scroll up in the chatter, we'll put we'll repost the link to request a detailed home assessment. I'll do that right now.
Great. We also had a good idea about having some kind of volunteer corps that helps homeowners, limb their junipers or get rid of their junipers and do mitigation work. And I think there are some really great examples out there, especially in some of the foothill communities. If you're not familiar with saws and slaws, they can be a great example of how the community, how they motivate each other and how they actually get work done. That is a completely volunteer run group as well. And then do you have anything else you want to add? I know that Jerry's neighborhood was pretty successful with using like a community cleanup day with all of their neighbors to work on their common area. So that's another option that the city actually has a community cleanup day. Hopefully in the future, there'll be some funding to help neighborhoods pick projects specific to what their needs are, whether that's, cleaning up around the pond or doing some fire mitigation. But that's also, a great way to kind of get volunteers to help people, because, when you start thinking about your neighbors, there might be some older adults in your neighborhood that need that extra help, because we found that there's lots of reasons why people don't mitigate. It could be time, it could be money, it could be the labor. It could also just be education. Maybe they don't know their risks and they just need more instruction and guidance about it. Let me see. Jamie just posted the detailed wildfire home assessment request. So of course, please reach out. And like we were talking about working with HOAs, if you have a neighbor, whether they're right next door or 3 houses down, you guys can make an appointment together and we can come out and visit you. Let's see, any other questions? Please feel free to put in the chat box or unmute and let us know.
Danielle, I just wanted to mention that you've mentioned already that we'll make the link to the video available. And I think at least some of you found out about this session through an announcement that your homeowners association sent out. We will not only send you all the link to the video, but we'll also send to your homeowners association that link for distribution through your regular homeowners association newsletter or emails. And that when that comes out, that might give you an opportunity to have conversations with neighbors and suggest that they take a look at the video as a way for you to help get that neighborhood conversation started.
Thank you, Karen. That's a great point. Okay, and then somebody said that they also saw advertisement for this on Nextdoor, and that's always been a really helpful tool for our outreach and
yeah, we submitted
education.
Several of those throughout the city.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I'll give one last chance for any questions. Thank you so much for participating today. It really means a lot that all of you care so much to learn more about the risk and also what you can do to reduce that risk. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to our department. We're happy to answer questions. We're happy to come visit. And I'm always happy to do education to HOA meetings. Please feel free to reach out.
So Danielle, I just posted the wildfire-help email address is a great way to get a hold of the three of us. So if you've got a question, comment, concern, or for some reason the form didn't work to submit your request, you're welcome to reach out to us with questions. Both Chief Oliver, Danielle, and I all have access to that email address. And if you want to direct friends, neighbors, anyone to submit, either requests or questions to that place, that's a great place to do it. Also, I love some of the suggestions that came up in the chat. One, to have a flyer about junipers. I know that's been initiatives that other agencies that have a wildfire problem have addressed before, and I think that's an awesome idea. The junk the juniper movement, as it's been called in other places, I support that. And also, there was a point here, I wonder if those tree owners even are aware they need to do it. They might not be, and that's what we're going to add. The challenge that we pose to everyone here is to tell your neighbors or tell somebody that that has vegetation like that in the yard, that it's a threat, and we'd love to come out and educate them about what the alternatives are.
Yeah, if you
So
have
thanks, everybody.
if you feel like you would be a spark plug in your neighborhood, or somebody that might be a good one, please, we love working with Jerry's. They are so great. So thank you very much. We really appreciate all of you. And thank you very much, Jerry, for helping us put this on. We couldn't have done it without you.
It looks like Eve has a question.
Yes, it was, if we want
Thank
your
you.
help, call or email where?
wildfire-help@bouldercolorado.gov.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, well, I'll let everybody go. Thank you so much for your time tonight.